Filmmakers like John Carpenter I have always considered one of the rebels of cinema. He has never really been popular with mainstream Hollywood, nor has his films, with the exception of films like Halloween, been major box office hits. Critics would usually be merciless in their criticisms of his movies, but Carpenter would prove them wrong time and time again, as his films would become modern film classics, studied and analysed by film lovers and filmmakers everywhere. Dark Star in 1974 was a low-budget, quirky sci-fi comedy and was Carpenter's theatrical debut that would cost only $60,000, and the film was co-written by Dan O'Bannon, who in turn would act in the film and work on the special effects, while Carpenter would create the musical score, as well as the writing, producing and directing. Dark Star would draw the attention of George Lucas, who in turn would hire O'Bannon to help create the special effects of Star Wars, and he would later be hired to write the screenplay for Alien in 1979. Carpenter would get much attention for Dark Star and would start to receive many offers of films to direct. It was the two scripts titled Assault and Eyes which drew Carpenter's attention, and after reviewing the early drafts of the scripts, he agreed to write and direct Assault and rewrite the second script, Eyes, which was originally sold to Barbra Streisand and John Peters, but was later renamed Eyes of Laura Mars. But producers J. Stein Kaplan and Joseph Kaufman wanted to concentrate more on Assault and thought it would be the perfect film for John Carpenter. Carpenter knew both producers well. J. Stein Kaplan was a close friend of Carpenter's from his USC film school days, and Joseph Kaufman he knew from Philadelphia. Both of the families of these producers would form the CKK Corporation, which in turn would finance Assault.
There was an investor who wanted to make Eyes of Laura Mars. It was called Eyes at first. And instead I sold it to Columbia Pictures. So the investor said, well, what else have you got? I said, well, let me try to write something. So I sat down. In a period of time, out came Assault on Precinct 13. Assault came out very freely in terms of what was its content. It was kind of basically a Rio Bravo type situation in the ghetto in Los Angeles. But it was also other things. It had a little touch of Night of the Living Dead. It had little touches of kind of exploitation movies at the time. Much like Halloween, it was just kind of a free type expression. Back then, I didn't know yet what I didn't know. I think later on you find out.
Assault was made for just under $100,000. Carpenter would direct, but under the condition that he have total creative control. He was hoping to make a Howard Hawks style western. Hawks was a director that Carpenter idolized and was heavily influenced by, but with a budget of just $100,000, he was very limited to do a western.
Partially, yes, I've been a big fan of Rio Bravo and the work of Howard Hawks, and the enclosure idea of Rio Bravo was very appealing to me. And I kind of wanted to recast it in a modern setting because, frankly, at the time I realized, well, I'm not going to sell a cowboy movie, a western. Nobody's going to buy it. But they will buy an exploitation film. This was back in the days when you could still do those kind of things.
Carpenter would later joke that writing the screenplay for Assault came together very fast. There were many references in the script to Rio Bravo, and Carpenter would even employ the pseudonym John T. Chance as editor. This was John Wayne's character's name in Rio Bravo. In making Assault on Precinct 13, he would also be influenced by George A. Romero's 1968 film Night of the Living Dead, and the gang Street Thunder are in many ways like the zombies in a Romero film, and the gang members have no humanity and are slow but relentless in their approach. Carpenter would even give the gang members in the film almost no dialogue. There are even subtle references made to directors like Sergio Leone and Hitchcock. Although the film's title eventually would be titled Assault on Precinct 13, the police station under siege by the gang is referred to as Precinct 9, Division 13 by the staff sergeant over the radio, an error which would almost have the film be titled The Siege. In the film, the precinct's new address is 1977 Ellendale Place, which is written on the sign in front of the building. This was actually director John Carpenter's real address when he first lived in Los Angeles. Casting the film was a long process and would take several months to cast the right actors. The main cast were experienced actors, but were mostly obscure actors, starting with actor Austin Stoker as Lieutenant Ethan Bishop. Stoker had appeared previously in the fifth Planet of the Apes movie, Battle for the Planet of the Apes, and the black exploitation film Sheba Baby alongside Pam Grier. Darwin Joston was cast as Napoleon Wilson and had worked mainly on television, and at that time was actually Carpenter's next-door neighbour. Carpenter would add to the cast Charles Cyphers as Officer Starker and Nancy Loomis as Julie. Cyphers and Loomis would both star in Carpenter's Halloween 2 years later as father and daughter. Laurie Zimmer was cast as Lee. Zimmer hated her performance when watching the dailies, but Carpenter loved her in the role. Kim Richards played Kathy, a little girl who was accidentally gunned down by the gang. Richards had starred in a number of TV shows like Nanny and the Professor and the Disney films Escape to Witch Mountain and Return from Witch Mountain. Incidentally, her older sister, Kyle Richards, would star in Carpenter's Halloween in 1978. Other actors included Tony Burton and Henry Brandon as Sergeant Cheney. James Jeter would appear as Precinct Captain, but he would receive no on-screen credit.
Dealing with actors, I hadn't had a lot of experience yet, and actors frightened me. I didn't understand them. So that was a real tricky situation for me. I had to learn. I didn't have any classes on. I sat in on acting classes, but they didn't help in terms of the numbers of people that you have to deal with and the numbers of approaches to acting. Everybody's a little different.
Assault on Precinct 13 was shot in only 20 days and started production in November of 1975 with 2 weeks of shooting indoors, followed by 2 weeks on location. Carpenter would hire a few of his USC film school buddies to work on the film.
A couple of the guys, actually. This famous sound designer, Ben Burt, got himself shot out of the window. Well, I took my best friend from my hometown, Tommy Lee Wallace, was my production designer, and he helped me with the editing. I've used him on several films. He's become a director in his own right.
Like the film Dark Star, Carpenter would be responsible for almost every aspect of the film's creation. Not only would he write, direct, and score the film, but edit the film as well.
Night of shooting was on a Friday, and we had to shoot, no, it was on a Saturday, I apologize. We had to shoot inside of a real prison in Venice, California, and we went in. It was a night shoot. Actually, no, it was in the morning. We went in at 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and we emerged at about 9:30 Sunday morning after shooting in there. The difficulty was in real prisons, the bars. It's lighting those and shooting them. It's a nightmare. Living nightmare. That was the most intense shooting I've had. I can remember being just completely exhausted.
Wallace remarked about Carpenter, "I hardly knew what the job required, but he believed in me. And of course my price was right." It was typical of John during those lean days. He made the very best of whatever talent and facilities he had around him. Carpenter called this film his first real film because it was actually the first film he had shot on schedule. It was also the first time he worked with Deborah Hill, who had become a longtime collaborator of Carpenter's. She would work on the film as the assistant editor. Carpenter's philosophy on shooting Assault, which can be applied to making any low-budget film, was to shoot as little footage as possible and extend the scenes for as long as he could. The day and time titles used in the film was added to make Assault feel more like a documentary. The interior scenes of the police station were shot on the producer's studio's set, a studio that is now no longer in operation. The first scene, where we see several gang members of Street Thunder gunned down by cops, was shot at USC. The gang members were actually played by USC students, who Carpenter remembered had a lot of fun on set, finding different ways of dying while spilling blood all over themselves. The scene where Ethan Bishop tells a story about his father sending him to the police station when he was 6 years old with a note was actually based on the true story told by Alfred Hitchcock about his childhood. The White Warlord was played by Frank Doubleday, who also had a significant role as the bad guy, Romero, Duke's crazy-haired sideman in John Carpenter's Escape from New York. During post-production, the distributor would reject Carpenter's original title, The Anderson Alamo, in favour of the film's present title, Assault on Precinct 13. The film, before its release, would go under extreme scrutiny for its violent and shocking scene involving a child being shot and killed, so the MPAA would threaten to give the film an X rating. The distributor advised John Carpenter to give the MPAA a version with the scene cut out to get an R rating, and put the graphic scene back in, and simply distribute the original version. This plan would actually work, and the shocking scene would go unnoticed. Assault on Precinct 13 was one of the few movies that would graphically portray a child being shot. Carpenter actually would regret shooting the ice cream scene in such an explicit way. Assault on Precinct 13 in the 1990s would receive unsolicited publicity from actor and director Mel Gibson, who, in an interview, would describe how he liked movies that went too far. He would then go on to describe the ice cream scene in great detail. He added that he was sitting stunned in an Australian cinema, watching a little girl get shot and dying a horrible death. Gibson would inspire people to watch Assault on Precinct 13, which would in turn promote the film for the video rental market. John Carpenter composed the electronic score for the film and wrote it in just 3 days. He composed the score alongside film school friend Tommy Lee Wallace. Carpenter made roughly 3 to 5 separate pieces of music. He was partially inspired by Lalo Schifrin's score for Dirty Harry and Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song. Assault on Precinct 13 was released in Los Angeles on November the 3rd of 1976. The film would receive mixed reviews, but when the film premiered in 1977 at the London Film Festival, it received major praise, leading to critical acclaim, first in Britain and then throughout Europe. According to a critic from The Guardian, the applause at the London premiere for the film was deafening. John Carpenter was always underappreciated in the US, but majorly respected in Europe as one of the greatest filmmakers of his time. Assault on Precinct 13 is considered by many as one of the greatest and one of the most underrated action films of the 1970s, and one of John Carpenter's best films. Critic Derek Malcolm of Cosmopolitan magazine would write, "The film is fast becoming one of the cult movies of the year. The great virtue of the film is the way it grabs hold of its audience and simply refuses to let go. It exploits all our fears of irrational violence and unmotivated attack, and at the same time manages to laugh at itself without spoiling the tension." Carpenter, who is clearly a director with places to go, has succeeded. When the film became popular in Britain, Michael Myers of Miracle Films purchased the British theatrical distribution rights, promoting the film, giving it high praise. Carpenter was so delighted by the high praise he received from Myers that he would name the killer Michael Myers in Halloween 2 years later after him. This film would also mark the first film where John Carpenter's name would precede the movie title. After the success of Assault on Precinct 13 in 1977, the other script, titled Eyes, which was written by Carpenter, was picked up and retitled Eyes of Laura Mars in 1978, and the thriller would star Faye Dunaway and Tommy Lee Jones, and was directed by Irvin Kershner. Assault on Precinct 13 was unrelenting, taut, gritty, and one of the most exciting action crime thrillers of all time, and established John Carpenter as one of the best directors working in cinema. The Rio Bravo and Night of the Living Dead influence is definitely felt in the film, but the film is really its own entity. And John Carpenter adds his own unique and gritty style to the film, which has instilled the film as a major cult classic. The film was remade in 2005, and the remake with the same name of Assault on Precinct 13 starred Ethan Hawke and Lawrence Fishburne, and was good, but truly lacked the edge, grit, and brilliance of the original. John Carpenter is truly one of the greats of cinema who cannot be matched. My name's Jonathan. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and like what you see on my channel, please subscribe, and if you would like to become a patron on my Patreon, click on the link below.